Hello, I'm Everetts Watercolors. Welcome to my classroom. Today we're going to pick up where we left off on Demo 1 with our basic landscape. I'm going to show you part 2. I want to show you how I finish off the painting and how I put a little couple of special techniques I think you'll be surprised to see. And I hope you'll learn from this. A basic landscape, we basically have 3 parts: a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. Over to the painting table and I'll show you how we get started. This is where we are left off on part 1. And what I'm going to do today is start off with the impact area. The impact area is this section up in here where I have more detail. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use my colored pencils to start out with. This is a 24 set of watercolor pencils, and I go up here and I'm just going to block in. I'm using watercolor pencils so I can control the edges, a little more detail, and watercolor pencils have the same pigment as watercolor, so just by adding water to it, it comes out the same, and a little more control, especially around the area of interest up here. Okay, now let me move this aside here. Now I'll pick up my brushes. I'm going to mix up some paints here. Now I'll go back in over top of that watercolor pencil a little bit, and what I'm going to do now is knock down some of this edges over here. And this is my dark area I'm putting in, and I'm trying to also show a little depth here where this tree line overlaps the little background. And also be careful, I'm not going to try to make a straight line. I want some edges there that give me a little bit of interpretation of depth and not straight lines. Okay, now to get closer to the building area, what I'm going to do today, though, I'm going to show you some different colors that I use. On this little building, I'm going to use a light blue. And a light blue to me could be the example of a white color, but a light color. And then this other building over here, I'm going to put a little bit darker. This barn, this is the shadow side of this barn over here, so I'm going to put in a dark color here on the shadow side. I'm going to have the light coming in from this direction here across the painting, so this will be my shadow side here, so I'll put a little dark color on this edge of the building, this side of the building. Okay, then on the side the light's hitting, I'm going to have a lighter color. So this is going to be a little lighter. I'm using the red color with a lot of water mixed in because it becomes out very, very bright. I show this to be a okay, and then for the other side of that little building, I'm going to make it a darker blue because it's in shadow. So I'll mix up some dark blue and come back here and put in some dark blue on this side over here. And I'll pick up the tissue. Tissue to me is really a 4th or 5th brush because I use it to take out the paints. And when I never touch the end of my brush with my hands. I've always used a tissue or a paper towel and wipe the paint and water off of the brush. I never touch it. Let me bring in the second. I've got a close-up of this. Let me bring the close-up to see some of this detail. Now, on the silo, again, I'm going to use another color. Around the impact area, I use a lot of bright colors. And here, I'm going to use a little bit of that yellow color here on this silo on this side. It's a little brighter color, and that's what I want around the impact area, a little brighter color. Now, something really special. The Holbein paint, they have metallic paint. I'm going to use some silver. This is called silver watercolor paint. And what it does for me is that, especially on buildings like this old barn, I'm going to put this silver on top of the roof, which makes it look like a metal roof, aluminum roof, and it gives a little glisten when you put light on it, a little shine of light on it. It actually shines. And I'm going to put a little bit over on this smaller building here just to finish that top off. This is silver paint, and I'm going to put a little bit on top of the silo. Now, before I get away from this area, I'm going to a little more detail. I'm going to finish this detail. I'm going to pick up a watercolor brush, watercolor pencil. Just a little bit of dark brown. I'm going to go ahead and put in some fence posts here. And again, this keeps me from having to worry about using a real tiny brush for this, because it's just fence posts. And I can put some indication or a hint of some of the areas coming across. Oh, okay. Well, that's where it pretty well completes my impact area. Now, what I want to do now is move into adding an element. I leave an area here blank, which is really a fence line. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a couple of brushes. Let me move you back to the other view. Now, so I'm moving a bigger area. So let me move here this side. So I'm going to take the light color and I'm going to move down on this side of the this old fence post here. And as long as I got the color, I'll pick it up here and pick up this. There's another fence post over here for the light side. And there's one down here. They get further away, they get smaller and smaller. That's perspective. Perspective in the painting. And then I'm going to pick up that second brush and put in the darker side. And I can drag that down by the edges. I can make it look like a rough edge. Little dry brush. Make it look like an old fence post. A little more water in the brush. Yeah, add more water to the brush and makes the watercolor flow a little better. Otherwise, you get too much dry brush. It's hard to move the brush. And this one over here, pick up this one. Now, as I get smaller and smaller, I'm going back to that smaller brush because I have less of a space to work with. So I use a smaller brush to pick up the darker color on some of these smaller areas. Okay. Okay, now at this point here, basically the painting is about 80% done, and you could really stop at this level. This could be an impressionist level of a painting. It shows it has an area of impact. It has lights and darks. It has lots of white still showing, but where you could leave the painting alone at this level here and call it done. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm going to add a second layer of color at this point. And let me get my bigger brush. This area over here is a cool color, greens and so forth. I'm going to cover 2/3 of this with a darker value. Save some of the underlying color, but I'm going to cover basically 2/3 of this. And on this side, which is a different area, there's more warm colors over here. I'm going to cover this 1/3 of this with a warm color. Okay? So 2/3 over here, 1/3 over here. So let's get going. I'm mixing up some cool colors, which will be basically greens, mixed in with a little bit of blue. Now, before I put this color down on the paper, what I do is I take a second sheet, or a test sheet. It's the same kind of paper, 140 pound, but I go over here and I'll take a swatch, and I'll lay that next to the area I'm going to paint. That way, I have a little test sheet here before I start painting. Now, again, I don't want to cover all this up. There's some good things going on here, but I do want to add a little more color, maybe some textury look into some of this area, especially along the edges. I want to get that. I don't want that to be so defined over here. But I do want to leave some of those areas still. And I'm going to cover 2/3 of this area with a darker layer. And I can come back in here and play a little bit with the edges. Making sure I break up some of those spots that look like they're lines and so forth, using a smaller brush. Okay, now on the other side, I want to mix up some. Now I better switch a brush because the brush has still got some paint in it. So I'm going to come over here and mix up a lighter color. It'll be a warm color. The browns are warm, a little bit of yellow ochre mixed in there, and lots of water because I don't want it too dark. And again, I'm going to test on my test sheet. Test on the test sheet what color I want to put over there. Okay. Now on this side, I'm only going to cover up 1/3, but I do want to cover up some of that edge over there, up here along this tree line. And this is going to help also cover up some of the white areas. I always watch out for straight lines. I don't want to have straight lines, even in an area that's got another layer on it. Now, in watercolor, also, when you put it down, I always remember that even though it looks a little darker, and I can go back and pick up a little bit of that color just to give it a little variety. It's going to dry at about 40% lighter after it dries. Now, I'm not quite finished yet with the edges of this. I want to pick up a little bit of that yellow ochre color. And I'm going to fill in, going to have some weeds and so forth growing along the sides here. Along the edge of the road there's going to be some brown grass, or that'll help take out some of those white areas. I'm eliminating some of the whites now. I'm just taking this and putting in some color, and I want to have, actually looks like grass are growing along here, some brown grass along the edge of the road. That also help cover some of the whites. And also on this side of the road I'm going to put the same kind of color. I'm going to have some brown grass over here also. This is where the farmer has driven down the road, and he's dropped off some old hay or something along the road, and it's blown up on the side. As I get further and further away, I'm less and less defined. I'm covering up some of those white areas. And the last little white area I see up here is along the top of this. And this could be some dirt along here on the edge of the garden. Now, okay, I looked at and worked on the impact area. I added the element, the fence line. I've added a second layer, 2/3 here, 1/3 over here, and also eliminated some of the whites. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to add in a shadow pattern. I got some light over here on this side, shining across this direction across the road. Let me show you how I do that. First of all, I do a little bit of planning before I start doing shadows. So I'm going to put some wet media acetate over top of my painting. This wet media acetate is a plastic, but it's also friendly to watercolor. That's why it's called wet media acetate. And what I can do here is I can take a color, the colored shadow. In this case it'll be I'm going to mix a little bit of purpley, a little bit of that quinacridone violet, mixed in a little bit of blue, and then put in some brown to give me a shadow color. And again, I can use my test sheet over here to see if that's the right color. And really, the shadow should be the same color as the object that you are painting on. So this brown's down here. I'm going to pick up more brown along with that that quinacridone violet and blue. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going to plan my shadows across the road here. And I'm not painting on the paper yet. I'm just playing with where I want to go with that color. And this one up here might come down. And as I get further away, they'll get a little bit smaller and lighter. And as you can see, this acetate, I can paint on this, and it gives me a design or a pattern that I can go by. Okay. Now, when I'm happy with that, then what I do is I take that, I slide it off to the side where I can still see it. I'll put it over here on the side where I can see it against some white paper. And then I prepare my brush with the same paint. And then I go in and I start putting in shadows. Now this may be the scary part for some artists, some beginners, because you really can't make a mistake. Just plan it out so that it does. And if you look at more shadows when you're out outside when the sun is shining. You know, look at shadows. Look how they go across the ground and how they follow the contour of the terrain. Look at them shadows against the building, trees that shine down on the grass. And you'll pick up a lot of clues there about how to do shadows. And shadows are very interesting. You can make a whole painting out of 2/3 shadows and 1/3 actual subject matter, and make it an interesting painting. And then just make it a variety of brush strokes. Don't make them all the same. Some are smaller, some are larger, some are darker. And also I can use that tissue I've talked about. I can go back and blot some of that away, give it a little texture look. And again, the tissue is it picks up the watercolor very nicely while it's still damp. Over here, and I got another one over here, and they get fainter and fainter as I go. You know, as far as perspective goes, they get smaller and they get lighter. Instead of changing the color, I just use less paint. Okay, now the real last thing I do when I look at a painting after I've gotten this far is I take a look at it and I say, okay, what else can I do to possibly bring out more of this area up in here? I think looking at overall, there's a little bit of light area down here at the bottom and across the sides. So I'm gonna reduce that, and I'm gonna show you a way I do it. I'm going to use a spray bottle. This is a fine mist spray bottle, and it's got some blue paint in it. And I also have a shield here. I hold this shield over top of the corner here, and then I just make sure the paint's ready. And I hold this up against the corner, and I can go along take some of that color here. I'll put this aside. Add a little water to my brush, and I go back and I'll knock down some of those bright areas. And I'm also picking up some of the little dots that fall out of the paintbrush or out of the bottle, and kind of smooth those out a little bit. Okay. Now I could go on and on and on and on to try to improve that. I like to let my paintings set aside for a day or two, and then I come back to them and maybe fine-tune some areas. But basically, today's lesson was to get it to a point where we can call it a finished painting. There's a couple others. You know, as I look around, I see more things. These white areas up here, I can knock these down to make the. So I mean, it's not a continual process, but it's something you could do a little bit here and there as you come back at it. But let me show you one thing I do at the end. When I'm at this stage, I take a mat board Now this is now when you finish the paintings, this would wind up fitting on a let's see if I can move this over a little bit so you can see the whole thing. I'll bring this over to the edge. Get this out of the way so you can see the whole frame. And now it's in a mat board that is a 20 by 16 frame. So even if you framed it, it'd be a 20 by 16 painting with the colors you have in there. And also, I could also take this, and if I wanted to, I could even make a smaller painting out of it. But I could take a smaller mat board. This is an 8 by 10 size. And I could play around. I could play around with reducing the painting to a smaller piece, depending on, let's say, some section you weren't quite happy with, or something didn't quite work out exactly the way you planned. Then you can always crop it out. You can make a smaller painting out of it by just taking a smaller piece, and therefore you'd have a painting. Okay, well, I hope you got something out of that today. I wanted to finish off the painting today to give you an idea of how I work at a painting. This was a demo. In some of my studio paintings, I spend a lot more time and a lot more details on the types of things that I do. But I think today will give you an idea of how I approach a painting, how I handle the brushwork, how I add different techniques. And I think the technique of adding a spray bottle here or there, also adding special paints, especially in the impact area, and add those shadow patterns. The shadow patterns can be very, very hard to do unless you practice it. But with that wet media acetate, you can practice and plan, and it wipes right off. It's just water on paper, and if it dries on there, you just take a wet sponge and it wipes right away. So it's usable over and over and over again. So the sheet I have today is 11 by 14, so it covers a quarter sheet. So on all these things I showed today are on my website, everettswatercolors.com. Have supplies on there. So you all have a nice day, and thank you for joining in. I had a great time. I hope you did too. So I'm going to be signing off. Have a nice day.